It is November 6th, Sunday, November 6th, and I finally caved and downloaded CapCut because now all of the social media platforms are making it a little bit more difficult for you to create natively through their app and then repurpose it for other platforms. Although I know a lot of people use Snaptic, but sometimes the sound is a little bit off, and then a workaround is then they end up using CapCut. So I'm going to try it out. I'm also going to try out using it for maybe editing of this video. But this past weekend, Greg and I celebrated our 1-year anniversary a little bit early because I'm going to be traveling on the actual day of when our anniversary would be. But we went out to dinner last night, and I had asked the question of like what we've learned about relationships in the past year, and I thought I would share some things I've learned. The first is that I had been doing a lot of work prior to coming into this relationship around my anxious attachment tendencies. And I call them anxious attachment tendencies because the way we self-identify is powerful. So I used to say I'm anxious attachment, and then I would see myself having protest behaviors and what would be classic anxious attachment behaviors for me. So now I say anxious attachment tendencies because it means that there is an option for it to move. But I think I had seen something on Instagram through this account called Create the Love, which was all about how, like, in order to move out of our own anxious attachment, we needed to learn to really fall in love with ourselves. So I don't even know if I've shared this, but the way that Greg and I met from August, so in 2021, I was kind of like sporadically dating. I attempted to do this friends with benefits thing over the summer, and it didn't work. And then in August, I ended up dating another person, and I thought that everything was amazing about the way that we got along. We could spend hours together, but we just weren't compatible in one area. And I remember when that relationship ended, I said something like, a past version of myself would have tried to convince you to stay in the relationship, but I am just going to accept that this is what needs to happen. Still hurts, of course, doesn't diminish how being rejected or heartbreak feels at all. But I do think it was growth to not try to cling on to something that wasn't going to work. So now we're back to August 2021. I decided that I was going to go on a self-imposed 20-date challenge. And there wasn't really anything like super interesting about this 20-date challenge, but the mini goal was that I had spent a lot of time with myself during the pandemic, that I felt comfortable being with myself. And while I prioritized and knew that I wanted romantic connection, my actions weren't aligning with that desire. So the 20-date challenge was like, Tiffany, you got to go on 20 dates. And in August, I think through December, that would have come out to like about a date a week. And I told myself it's just 20 dates total, so it doesn't need to be 20 first dates. And then at the same time, I was just reading a couple of books and listening to podcasts around kind of like the journey of being more confident in what I could offer to partnership and how I showed up. So one strategy that actually worked for me kind of was one of the guys that I dated was just really bad at texting. And what it made me realize was that our relationship, or in the past, I had put so much weight on an asynchronous texting behavior versus like this guy who's bad at texting. I mean, it will literally take him like days to get back to me. And it wasn't a sign of his interest, because we would like make plans and then we wouldn't really like text that much before the next date would happen. And then we would have a great time on the date. And then, you know, kind of just use texting to schedule our next date rather than like going back and forth to try and like create some connection through texting. And I actually found that most of my anxious attachment tendencies were like weaponizing texting in a way, just like not being very healthy with my texting behavior. So anyway, I also was reading a book called How to Not Die Alone by Logan Murray. And there were some good takeaways from that book. It had been recommended to me by a friend, Megan, a couple months prior. And two lessons that I think I learned. One was she had something called the secretary test, which is if you're hiring a secretary, you're going to get a bunch of applications and then you interview a couple and then you have to pick one. And Logan suggests that dating should be the same way, but the way that the apps are set up makes us think that it could be the next swipe or the next swipe or the next swipe. And that was helpful to kind of just be like, or at least with this 20 date challenge, it was like, we're going to see what the pool looks like, at least in this summer to fall of 2021. And then we're going to go on a handful of dates, and then we're going to, you know, see who the best candidate is. You know, I don't want to make it sound too job application-y, but I am a former recruiter, and I have gotten a little bit of slack around how some of my texts sometimes can be a little formal. But anyway, so that was kind of like the first thing I learned. Then the second thing I learned was that there needs to be a transition from prom date dating to life partner dating. And the prom date is someone who kind of like looks really good in pictures, you have a lot of fun together, but when things get hard, like they're not around. And the life partner dating is really thinking about, is this someone that I can build a life with and be a team player? And for me, like be a good dad, and show up when things are really hard, because things are going to be hard. So I was doing all this work, and then I actually had like, some affirmations that I would tell myself before I would go on a date. And I would be like, I like myself and I'm not threatened by anyone else. Because what I would often find happen is that I would like compare myself to this person's ex, or I would like get really territorial around who else they were dating. And then I'm just like, I am me, and I think I have a lot to offer a relationship, and I like myself. And that's the most important thing, because I'm already showing up whole for whatever, you know, possibility there might be in a relationship. And then I don't want to compare myself to other people, because that just becomes a slippery slope, not just in relationships, but in other areas as well. And, you know, we're all a work in progress, or I know I'm a work in progress, and definitely find myself like going down some of those slippery slopes sometimes. But starting out with those affirmations, and there was one more affirmation, which is, remember to keep things fun and light. Because what my anxious attachment tendencies would do is that I would want the person to like commit right away. But my therapist would be like, Tiffany, after a first date, you like barely know someone, you know, you're both showing up like kind of awkward. You don't know what the dynamic is going to be. And there were like now looking back, I thought they were relationships, but they were probably situationships where I'd be like, this is it, I'm gonna commit. And we would like commit to each other after like the first or second date. So I was also telling to myself to like not try to rush anyone into a relationship too quickly. And to let my partner kind of lead that conversation rather than me force it, because I knew if I forced it, it would be my anxious attachment tendencies coming in. So anyway, so this is actually not what I thought this video was gonna be about. But we ended up going out to dinner yesterday, and a couple things I've learned over the past year. Number one is that relationships are a lot of work. And I think I had watched so many rom-coms that I didn't, like whenever you involve other people, there's going to be some friction there. So that was number one. And then number two was I noticed that we had we had a different relationship when we were long distance versus when we were living in the same city. And when we were living in the same city, we were actually living together. And so one thing I learned was that just because we're living together, we have to make time to still be in a relationship. Otherwise, we're just roommates. So we had to be intentional about finding time to date and making sure that we were still deepening our relationship, even though we were in the same city now. Versus before with long distance, I would fly to LA and we would set aside like dedicated time because I was only in town for a few days. And then he would come to San Francisco and it would be the same. And part of the reason why my eyes are shifting is I'm trying to be a little bit better about like looking into the lens rather than looking at the screen at myself. And then I think there was one more thing that I learned. I guess one more thing that I learned is that I have a tendency to catastrophize, and I end up like being so hyper focused in the present that I'll forget like things that Greg has done sometimes. So like I remember on this last trip to San Francisco, I got a little bit upset because I felt like we didn't like spend enough time together when we traveled together on this trip. And then I realized that like the first day we went out to dinner to like celebrate early anniversary. And then the next day we pretty much spent like almost the whole day together and got brunch. And then we like went to a fundraising gala, and did actually spend a lot of time together. And I was just like fixated on this one day when he had decided to make other plans. And I thought that we were going to spend that night like grabbing dinner or something. So, really to kind of just like be more aware of when those moments come up where I kind of just like forget. And yeah. And so, that's that. And now we're already at a 12-minute video. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this. I don't think that I'm going to edit it like I thought I would. But today I went to a Lakers game, which was pretty cool. And that was kind of like part 2 of our anniversary weekend celebration. And it has been good. And I will see all of you tomorrow. Oops.